Welcome to the media, the journalists who are present, and also a warm welcome to all the other representatives of organizations and institutions. I see also the delegation of the European Union in the Gambia. Thank you very much for attending our press conference. I want to introduce my colleagues here on the table. Next to me, you see Anne Marlborough. She's our electoral expert, electoral analyst who was here last year. You know already Chief Observer Norbert Neuser. In the middle, from Germany, he is a former member of the European Parliament. And at the left side, it's Rini Skuzu. She's our legal expert, our legal analyst. She was also part of the mission last year. You remember, we have been here last year for the presidential election for December. We came in last October 27, and we stayed until Christmas last year, and then we left because we were also happy to go back to our families. But the team was working hard during that time, the last 2.5 months, and finalized this report we want to present today. This is the final report of the election observation mission last year, and this morning we want to present the summary of it and some recommendations that are for consideration. The game is like this today. We will present our findings and the report today with the recommendations. After that, we will give some space for you to the journalists, but only the journalists because we have only limited time. So this is a press conference, and if you have questions after this presentation, it will be a lot of stuff to digest, I know. Maybe you have some questions. If you have, please ask them right after we had our presentation. If there will come up some questions later, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we will try to answer those questions even later. There are some hard copies of this final report. You can get one per media outlet because there's only limited amount of these material here in hard copy. But don't worry, because I will send around the digital version to you. So you will get it as a PDF file via email. You can also download this final report on our website, and you will find it probably also on Facebook and Twitter. So please be careful with this. We don't have a lot. Be fair. There will be also a press release at the exit when you leave. My colleague is sitting there. There are printed versions of the press release, but also the press release I will send around later to you as a PDF file to your email addresses. So you will have everything, even if you don't get a printed version today. Okay, enough of this introduction. I want to hand over now to our Chief Observer, Norbert Neuser, who will present now the final report of our mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The European Union deployed an election observation mission to observe the presidential election in the Gambia following an invitation from the IEC. The European Union election observation mission present from 27th of October to 24th of December last year. The mission's mandate was to observe all aspects of the electoral process and assess the extent to which the election complied with regional and international commitments for elections, as well as with national legislation. The European Union election observation mission comprised a core team of 16 experts based in Banjul and 16 long-term observers deployed to all areas of your country. For the election day on 4th of December, the EU observation mission deployed 16 additional locally recruited short-term observers to monitor polling, counting, and collation of the results. In total, the European observation mission deployed 40 observers from 17 EU member states, as well as from partner countries, Canada, Norway, and Switzerland. Let me talk now about the mission's final report. After 22 years of dictatorship, the 4th of December presidential election was the first fully contested presidential race since former President Jammeh's departure in January 2017. The election took place in a competitive and vibrant campaign environment, with all candidates meeting with voters throughout the country to convey their messages. It was characterized by a growing democratic tendency, including a strengthening judiciary and increased ability for citizens to express themselves. Important shortcomings remained, however, and there has been a delay in the realization of fundamental reforms. Ladies and gentlemen, this leads me to the aspect of international standards. The Gambia has acceded to most key international and regional standards. The legal framework provides a minimal basis for conducting democratic elections. Nevertheless, numerous gaps and ambiguities in this framework, coupled with limited accessibility to legal text, creates uncertainty and reduces transparency. With comprehensive constitutional and electoral reform not yet having materialized, significant reforms are crucial. Restrictions on fundamental rights as well as arcane laws are consistent with international and regional standards. Furthermore, the mission recommends reforms in the area of challenges to candidate nomination, campaign finance, and women's participation. Yesterday, we had a constructive meeting with the Independent Electoral Commission, and we have delivered the mission's final report. The duties of the Independent Electoral Commission are broad, while the capacity of the institution is very modest. Structural reforms is required, particularly in the creation of legal and gender divisions within the institution. Improvements in communication and transparency are recommended to facilitate better engagement with stakeholders. Importantly, the independence of the IEC is not protected under present constitutional arrangements. Legal reform is required to comply with regional and international standards. Biometric voter registration, for which a photograph and both thumbprints were recorded, took place from 29 May to 11 of July, prior to the EU election observation mission. Registration figures were disaggregated by gender and age for the first time. Women comprised 57% of registrants, while young people between 18 and 35 comprised 58%. Registration was conducted within the 53 National Assembly constituencies. The diaspora was not included, despite a 2021 Supreme Court ruling upholding the obligation of the IEC to register them. The IEC announced that just 6 nominations had been accepted. The other 15 aspirants had been rejected. There had been a brief period of public scrutiny during which objections to candidacies could be made by voters. Interested parties, however, were granted access for just 5 minutes. This exercise was not meaningful, as voters did not have a real opportunity to scrutinize the documentation and gather the information required to make grounded objections. The presidential election took place in a competitive and vibrant campaign environment. Throughout the campaign, freedoms were largely respected and the campaign was peaceful without serious incidents of violence. Overall, the campaigning was issue-based, also highly personalized. Throughout the country, campaigns met with voters extensively at large rallies in town, down to small meetings at the village level. Women took an active part, although they were rarely in leadership positions. The distribution of goods and misuse of state resources impacted negatively on the campaign. The distribution of various goods was directly observed by the EU Electoral Observation Mission at several rallies held by the incumbent parties. There were also widespread allegations of distributions of money through village chiefs reported to the EU Electoral Observation Mission's observers. If true, these practices are in breach of the IEC code. However, no action was observed to have been taken by its representatives. Overall, the campaign costs were very high, with the NPP spending far more on political publicity than on any other campaign. Lack of campaign finance regulation added to an unlevel playing field. Political party and campaign finance remain largely unregulated. The overall lack of transparency and accountability of campaign resources and expenditures disadvantaged candidates with less financial resources. It also limited voters' ability to make a fully informed choice. The inequity of access and spending in terms of political finance led to an unlevel playing field between contestants. The Constitution and the legal framework overall significantly limit freedom of expression. However, on the ground, interlocutors confirmed that the ability of speak freely has considerably improved since 2017, and Gambians without fear discussed openly their political preferences throughout the campaign period. The allocation of broadcasting licenses to business holdings threatens a diversity of view in the long run. The Gambia radio and television services covered the campaign in line with its obligations. Commercial TV, however, displayed significant bias towards the incumbent, granting him undue advantage. The media monitoring of the EU Electoral Observation Mission showed that the legal framework also unduly restricts freedom of expression online and does not guarantee a genuine independence of the public utilities regulatory authority. Privacy and personal data are not protected. The 2021 Access to Information Act, if properly implemented, will broaden the scope of information that government institutions, including the IEC, must publish online. Such enhanced transparency should reduce adverse effects of disinformation. Facebook, with some 500,000 users, was the prime discussion forum on the election and shaped the political discourse online and offline. False information and divisive tribal rhetoric migrated between Facebook and WhatsApp. Facebook did too little, too late to effectively counter damaging practices on the platform. Consequently, this information confused voters, and tribal rhetoric as such shrank the space of fact-based debate. Positively, national fact-checking and investigative online journalism helped identify disinformation for voters to make an informed choice, thus enhancing transparency. Women were active throughout the process, also their role in the presidential race was limited. None of the presidential candidates was female, while one woman aspiring to nomination did not qualify. Despite some legislative progress, further affirmative action is needed to address barriers to political participation for marginalized groups, including women, youth, and persons with disabilities. On election day, voter turnout was extremely high, reaching 89% during a polling day, which was calm across the country. The overall performance of polling staff was assessed as very good in almost 2/3 of the EU election observation mission observations. Polling and counting were observed to be technically well administered, while the transparency of the process was assessed as high. Procedures, particularly for counting and collation, were not well elaborated and were not always completely followed. Candidate agents were present in all polling stations visited, while citizens observers also participated visibly. More than a third of polling stations visited were not assessed as accessible to persons of limited mobility. Also, no formal dispute resolution mechanism applies for all stages of the process. Electoral cases filed on rejections of nominations were treated as a priority by the High Court. While electoral offenses are listed in the Election Act, they are nevertheless not sufficiently prosecuted to act as an effective deterrent. I now want to talk about our recommendations. The mission has looked at how electoral rights of the Gambian people under national law and Gambia's international commitments have been upheld. Our report and the accompanying 20 recommendations are the result of a comprehensive observation of the electoral process. They include 7 priority recommendations I want to mention here. The first one, make essential changes in the electoral legal framework. Bring the draft Election Act in line with international standards. Streamline provisions of the draft Constitution and the draft Election Act, as well as other acts relevant to the conduct of elections. Increase IEC capacity and transparency in critical areas, including the establishment of specialized divisions, legal, gender, within the IEC. The IEC should publish the complete presidential election results, disaggregated by polling stations, on its website without delay. In all future elections, disaggregated results should be released during the tabulation process. Legal provisions should be made for continuous registration and updating the voter register to allow for the removal of deceased voters, inclusion of citizens who will turn 18 prior to the election, and transfer of place of registration for people who have moved. Bring the legal framework, including the Constitution, the Criminal Court, and the Information and Communications Act, in line with the country's international and regional commitment on freedom of expression. Introduce a detailed and comprehensive complaints procedure throughout the electoral process with reasonable time limits for adjudication, regulating matters such as format and venue, including for the implementation of the Code on Election Campaign Ethics. Formalize clear and coherent procedures for pooling, counting, result transfer, and collation in conjunction with the introduction of improved security measures of result and collation forms. Ladies and gentlemen, what will happen now? We had already meetings with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the IEC yesterday. Today and the upcoming days, we will have more appointments with political parties, civil society groups, and other stakeholders. The mission looks forward to discussing the recommendation during an upcoming roundtable event with several Gambian stakeholders in detail and prospects for their implementation. Finally, it is up to the Gambian authorities and stakeholders to consider these recommendations. There are also other recommendations of the Gambian citizen observers which observed the elections. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention and for attending our press conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norbert Neuser, our chief observer from Germany, member of the European Parliament. I told you it's quite a lot of content today. We present all details you will find in the report. It's probably nice for you to read it to understand a little bit more, because this was kind of a very short, although it was a little bit long, summary. As Mr. Neuser said, there are 20 recommendations in total. 7 are kind of key priority, and they are all listed at the end of this report. So I would appreciate if you read it, but now we want to give you space for your questions. There will be no time for interviews later, because you know that we have a schedule these days, like every hour another meeting. So we are almost always in a hurry, but there should be a little bit time for you now to ask questions if you have. And there will be also time a few days later. You send me an email and we try to answer questions you maybe have a little bit later when you have read our report. I don't know, do we have a microphone somewhere? Yeah, because there is a first question there on the right side. Can you tell me please your name and the media you're working for?
Hello. Thank you. My name is Sana Kamara. I'm a freelance journalist. I'd like to ask a question regarding the recommendations. You've stated 7 of them. I'd like to know which ones of these are immediate priority for the IEC, considering that we have the National Assembly elections just a few weeks from now. And also there are the others that are long-term, and whether your discussions with the IEC have given any assurances for immediate implementation, especially of those that are of technical nature. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. So the recommendations are very, very broad, and they address many areas that are significantly long-term: constitutional change, legal change. So that's certainly not immediate. And you do have, as you say, the National Assembly elections imminent. Some of our priority recommendations, though, could be addressed immediately. And I'll give you some examples. One of the recommendations is that the IEC should publish election results without delay. The election results by polling station for the presidential election have not been published. There are no results on the IEC website disaggregated by polling station or constituency. People deserve to have access to that kind of information. So that's something that we think could be done retrospectively for the last election, and certainly should be on the agenda of the IEC for the forthcoming election. It's about basic access to information. Other of the recommendations that could be quite immediate would be around our recommendations 6 and 7 of the priorities, which are to do with procedural matters. So, for example, procedures around complaints and appeals during the electoral process. At present, there is an absence of regulation in this area, whereas the elections decree confers on the IEC a power to make regulations and to make rules to implement that legislation. So simple procedures and regulations by the IEC under the framework of the election law, they could come in quite quickly. And what we have in mind here are procedures around the campaign ethics code. So there is a code you're probably very familiar with. Politicians have signed up to it. And indeed, it's something that's well established. But there's very little detail on how that code is to be monitored and implemented and sanctions imposed, etc., by the IEC. So that requires elaboration. And another area that could be addressed immediately is around the procedures for polling, counting, and transfer of results. There are some guidelines given to the polling staff in a polling manual, but that's it. There are no other procedures detailed anywhere. And there's an element of ad hoc improvisation in different counting and collation practices. So all of that ought to be formalized and made identical across the country. And that's something that doesn't require change of any legislation. So that could be more immediate. Long-term change is detailed extensively in our recommendations. And I suppose law, it comes down a huge amount to law. The political and legal environment has been changing. As you've heard our chief observer say, there's been an improved democratic tendency. Freedom of expression has changed in practice, but an awful lot of the laws are still very repressive, particularly around freedom of expression. But there are many areas in which the law no longer reflects current practice. Even things like the voter registration card, that's not in your law. Instead, it talks about paper and writing on voter cards. So there are many areas where the law is just out of step and is redundant. But there are many areas in which the law does not protect human rights in the electoral and democratic context. There's so many, we could be here for a long, long time telling you about it. And that's why the report is so extensive. But the areas where there are legal and constitutional flaws range from violations of the human rights of persons with disabilities, for example. You have a Lunatics Detention Act that violates the right to vote and stand for election of persons with disabilities. That's just one out of many examples. 2, you don't have any laws that provide for specific representation of women in Parliament. And in the last National Assembly, as you might remember, only 3 of the elected seats were won by women out of the 53 constituencies. So many areas where law reform is called for. And just the final question that you raised was about the IEC. And to say, yes, we've presented our report to the IEC. And we were very gratified that they said to us that they will examine the report and they will consider it. So we hope that they will do that indeed. A lot of observation work has gone into this report, and we have been inspired by the regional standards and by the international standards that the Gambia has acceded to. This isn't the EU creating recommendations out of thin air. This is based very much on the consent of the Gambia, what you and your sovereign nation have decided to accede to within the framework of ECOWAS, the AU, and indeed the UN. So we're just reiterating those commitments of the Gambia, and we're offering the recommendations to yourselves to take forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Are there some more questions from the journalists present here?
I do have a question.
Wait a second. You will hopefully get the microphone. Maybe you can stand up and, you are there. Sorry. I thought it was there. Sorry.
Thank you very much. A question. The report. Oh, I just picked up on it. And it's there. About distribution of goods was reported. Widespread allegations of distributions of money through village chiefs. Reported to EU observers, and these illegal practices were also reported by citizen observer groups and media, and were in breach of the Elections Act and the IEC Code of Ethics. However, no action was taken by the IEC. What action would you be expecting from the IEC with regards to these observations that you've made? And then my other question, second question, is with regards to the timing of this report. It is now towards the end of February. The elections was concluded on December the 4th, 5th. Elections results came out. What about the timing? The preparation for the parliamentary elections is well underway right now. Do you think your timing is appropriate to ensure, give it the chance to be implemented? And then, my name is Yusuf Taylor for Gynaco News. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself, but those are the two questions I have.
I would like to answer the last part of your question. We have our regulations in the EU, how we observe the elections, and that's not depending if there are another close elections follow up. So we have to do a good report and include all the observations we did. And I think that is very serious, and we are not want to do this report in a hurry. So as Anne already mentioned, there are possibilities now to implement parts of these recommendations. But as the word means, recommendation, that means it's offered somehow by the European Union, and it has to be implemented together with us in a process of discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neuser. Yes, as Mr. Neuser has pointed out, this isn't a process. Our observation is not something that's immediate or short term. The engagement of the EU is an ongoing relationship. So there was an EU EOM for the elections back in 2017, and we offered recommendations then. Now we're reiterating some of those recommendations and elaborating some other recommendations. Really, it doesn't matter what day we published the report. First of all, we wanted it to be a very thorough, evidence-based report. We gave our preliminary findings right after the election, and then this is the more substantive reflection on that. But also, I want to draw your attention to an element of your own law, and it comes from an ECOWAS regional standard, and that is that it's not considered appropriate to change electoral laws within 6 months of an election. You know, particularly in the past even, electoral law has been used in a negative way in this country as a method of repression and entrenchment of the previous regime. So we're certainly not advocating immediate change. We would like you to respect your own standards, which are that law should not change close to an election. So between the period of the presidential election and the National Assembly, it's not a window we're going to advocate legal change within. So this is our standard. We have a methodology, and it's usually around 2 months after the election that we come with the report. So it really shouldn't have much of an impact on the National Assembly, but we'd be really delighted if the more immediate recommendations could be taken into consideration by everybody who could have some role in implementation of some of them. Now, on your point around the campaign environment and the issue of distribution of resources, role of the alcalos and the like, that brings me back to one of our priority recommendations. Our 6th priority recommendation addresses this issue of the code, the enforcement of the code of campaign ethics. We see this as a gap. There isn't elaboration of how that code should be put into effect. There isn't. there is largely silence around this matter. So we do believe that this requires redress. We're not going to tell exactly the IEC what sanctions to put into place, but what we're interested in is rule of law. That if there are rules in place on how the election campaign is to be run, well, those laws are meaningless unless they are implemented. And for proper implementation, you want proper adjudication. You want it requires some forum for receipt of complaints and some forum for adjudication. And it requires that natural justice be served within all of this. I mean, it's very detailed. It requires independent and impartial adjudication. So we trust that whatever kind of procedures are brought in, that they would follow natural justice, but we would just like to see these brought in so that this doesn't continue, that there are allegations, but that there are no steps taken to deal with the allegations. So it's something for the IEC to address.
Thank you very much for that response. I really appreciate that. Now, my follow-up question is to find out from you, this issue that you've just highlighted was also subject of the UDP court case. United Democratic Party took the election results to court. And some of the issues which you have raised in here are subject of that court case. Of course, now my question, and you're talking about natural justice as well. So my follow-up question is, do you have any observation with regards to that UDP court case? Obviously, I haven't had the chance to go through any of this. What's your observation with regards to that? Because that is certainly also part of the elections that has just been concluded.
Thank you. All I will say to you is that this is a document of public record, and that's really all that I can say about it. And in relation to court proceedings, we observed them, and whatever we have to say is in our report.
Do you know if you have anything? If you have made observations, but I haven't had a chance to go through it. So that's what I'm asking.
Can you repeat the question? No, I think no was the answer.
Are you referring to the court ruling regarding the UDP petition, whether it's in the report or not? Yes. Is this your question? Yes, yes. It is. It is included. It is included. The mission was present up until the hearing of the 24th December, and of course was informed on the outcome thereof.
Thank you very much for your question. I think there was another journalist somewhere in the back. Yes, he got the microphone. Please tell us your name and the media you're working for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Standard newspaper. According to the report, the mission made about 31 recommendations in 2017, and few of them were implemented. I just want to ask probably what the implications for future elections if these recommendations are not implemented by the authorities. And the second question is, what role will the EU play in terms of guiding the process of implementing these recommendations? Are you just going to make them and stop there, or you're going to make follow-ups with the authorities to ensure that they're implemented?
Thanks. All right. Thank you very much. Yes, so we offer these recommendations to the Gambia. We offer the recommendations to the national authorities. We offer them to political parties. We offer them to civil society. We offer them to the public. And that's our role. The Gambia is a sovereign nation, and our role is simply to be a partner and offer what support we can towards the process of democratization. And that's how we see the elaboration of these recommendations. We certainly will not interfere beyond offering the recommendations. We're delighted to have been invited. Back in 2017, we were delighted to be invited again for the presidential election. Then it's very much up to the Gambia as to how recommendations are taken forward. Now, that being said, there is, of course, an EU delegation that's very active and present in the country, and that works in partnership with government. And certainly the report of the Election Observation Mission is something that the EU delegation takes account of and factors into the relationship with the authorities of the Gambia. But it's very much in a role of support to democracy. So we're delighted when we're invited to come for elections, and we will come as we're invited, and we will offer further recommendations as we see appropriate.
Thank you very much, Anne. Are there any more questions? We sit here quite a long time already, and you know, there are some more meetings on our schedule today. Are there some more questions from your side, the journalists? Yes?
Will you be observing the parliamentary elections?
Yes, we are invited, but we only will be here with a very, very small team. But it shows that there is a good cooperation, and we are going to continue and following. A lot of work is to be done, and we are ready to do it together with Gambian authorities.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to my colleagues here on the table, and thank you very much to you for attending this press conference. It was a quite important press conference, presentation of our final report and the recommendations. You get the press release when you leave this room, and there are, as I said, some of these final reports you can take. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I will send you all the digital versions of our final report. Thank you very much. All the best. Good luck. Stay healthy. And thank you for attending this press conference.